Hi friends, this is your plant lover Neil and you are watching Plants My Love. In today's video, I'll show you how to make compost at your home. So we'll step to the place where I have been producing my compost for the past 3 years, and I'll be sharing my experience so that you can also make compost as easily as we do. So this is my backyard, and now I'll step to the place where we are generating organic compost. So this is the setup. We have got two of these. One is over here and other one is over there. So basically what this material that we have used is a plastic mesh. It's called chicken wire, and basically the use of plastic makes it quite resistant to weathering, and there will be no rusting or anything like that. So that's why we have used plastic. And basically this is a rectangular sheet of mesh which we have tied using rope. You can use zip ties also to tie them up. So as you can see, they are just rolled. I have rolled this sheet in a shape of a cylinder. So that's how the shape is. Now let's look at the diameter and the length of this setup. So the diameter, you can imagine, it's about the length of my arm. So it's approximately 1 meter in diameter, and the height, it comes to about approximately to my leg size it is. So it will be approximately 1 meter, or not 1 meter, around 2 meters tall, 1.5 meter you can say. The other one is a bit taller than this because we didn't have evenly shaped. And the support for this system is very simple. We have not used any external support. Basically what we did is we dug up a hole that is a bit deeper, like approximately 15 centimeters deeper from here, and then we piled up the sand across it. So from the support of the sand, this thing can withstand the weight of the compost. Sometimes it has happened that the compost was quite heavy and it started to tilt, but that was in rare occasions. This thing is quite sturdy, and if something does not dismantle it, it will stay put. Now let's talk about what all things can we put in this compost. So basically anything that is scrap material from your kitchen, not uh, non-veg materials like meat and dairy products, except those, all the green leafy vegetable scraps like peels of onion, garlic, and what do you say, all the fruit peels, and anything that is left over that is green and leafy and that does not decompose quite quickly, that you can place in this composting system. Apart from that, that composts of the nitrogen part of the compost, whereas the main constituent is the carbon. And the carbon, we take the dried leaves and shriveled petals and other garden waste that is generated from our garden. But preliminary what we take is this leaf, dried leaf from the tree cover that we have got along the wall, which basically shades this entire part of the garden. So this generates a lot of dried leaf, and the leaf is actually quite small, so it's perfect for composting. We don't have to dry it up and then break it. You can directly use this, since the leaf size, you can see, it's quite tiny. So this is what it make bulk of the compost is of. Other things, like sometimes there's some food article that spoils, then that we add it in the compost, but that is in rare occasions. Most commonly these things are put in this. And the carbon to nitrogen ratio is something which you have to keep in mind. Not like you don't have to follow it very rigorously, but there should be at least 30 times more amount of carbon in your compost compared to the nitrogen part. That will ensure that the composting system does not become too hot and does not start breeding bacteria that are not that generate smell. At present, if the from the time we have started composting, we have never experienced any bad odor from this compost. The reason for that is because we are making the compost pile in such a manner that the bacteria that grow in this system are basically very aerobic bacteria and not anaerobic bacteria. That means that it requires oxygen to grow, and the bacteria that take oxygen for growing generate only carbon dioxide and water. So those materials do not have any kind of smell that is bad smell, does not produce any bad odor. Whereas the anaerobic bacteria generate a lot of methane and other pungent gases, which if you can you can imagine the smell of rotten egg, which is basically the anaerobic decomposition of the egg. So uh, as we are talking about egg, we also put eggshells in this compost. Eggshells can be composted as they are primarily calcium. So basically, we crush them up and then we compost them. So they do not break down that quickly. Basically, they are calcium carbonate. They just provide a good, rich source of calcium for our plants, and it also improves the structure of the compost and the soil. So now let's talk about. We have talked about what we put in the compost. Now let's talk about the environment and other things that goes in it. So basically the main thing that goes in it is water. You require to keep it moist 24 into 7, and for that requirement to be fulfilled we have to place it in an environment that does not receive any direct light. So for us it's quite easy because almost major chunk of our property is shaded by trees, so we have got ample place for where which we receive heavy shaded heavy shading. So you have to place it in such an area that will ensure that the moisture in the compost pile remains and does not dry up that quickly. Also make sure that the compost is not overwatered. There will be two things if you overwater the compost. At first, if the compost is overwatered, then the decomposition process will be hampered, because a particular balance has to be made between the water concentration and the material that are required to be composted. So overwatering will hamper the decomposition process. Or other than hampering the decomposition process, what will happen is, because all of the nutrients that are generated in the compost are mostly water soluble. So if you overwater it, what will happen is eventually the nutrients will be stripped out from the compost. That is, they will get dissolved in the water and then the water will carry it away from the compost. So we have to prevent that from happening. So that's why only put that much amount of water that is required for the composting process. Overwatering will hamper in these two ways. Other than water and sunlight, the main important factor is oxygen. As I mentioned before, this composting process we are using is fully aerobic composting, and to facilitate that composting, we have ensured that the medium in which we are composting has got sufficient amount of aeration. So that's why these huge mesh comes very handy. So even if you go down, so you will think that this will the compost material will come out from the compost. Some does come out when it's broken down quite finely, but it's very insignificant amount. And when we place the composting material, because of the water and other material, it binds it up, and nothing comes out from this mesh. So don't have to worry whether such a big hole will lead to the compost pile getting out from the compost. So you can see here, little bit is coming out, only that much comes out at the most. But this is very important, this whole structure, because it allows sufficient amount of aeration in the composting pile, which is of utmost importance for the bacteria to live and grow. So that's why this design is quite successful. One more benefit of doing is aerobically, using aerobic bacteria, is the speed. The speed of decomposition is quite high compared to anaerobic bacteria. So, a well decomposed, we don't move this compost. It's kind of a lazy man's composting system. So even then, the compost does not take more than 6 months, at most 6 months. Sometimes it's ready in 4 months. So the reason for that is because we have provided sufficient amount of air and the ideal amount of water, and the ideal mix of the ideal mix of the carbon and nitrogen, that is 30:1. So if you do all these things like we mentioned, you will also get the same result. So since 3 years around, if you calculate, we have got around 10 bags of compost, that is from our own waste. So that the waste that would have ultimately ended up in landfill, we have generated something which is very useful, and we have hugely improved the fertility rate of our garden. We have talked about the smell, that this generates no smell, but you might be concerned about the other things like insects and bacteria that are growing in this. Well, certainly if you compost anything, there will be insects, and insects are a very important part of the composting process. Without them, the compost will not be fully decomposed, because bacteria cannot decompose very big chunks of material that we are putting. Insects breaks down those big chunks and provides them in smaller quantities, which the bacteria will ultimately decompose. So some people, so if you have to be more tolerant towards insects, they are not something that will come in your home. If you do composting, they'll only survive in the compost pile, and when you take out the compost, after some time they will either flee from the place, or they will basically die. So insects are quite important, and we have already talked about the time. It's around 6 to 4 months, 6 months max, 4 months minimum. In cold climates, we are at present, this system is in place in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, and in here it takes around that much time, and we can use it the year round. But in colder places, if you are planning to do composting where there are very cold winters, then you might have to increase the size and dimension of this setup. I guess doubling the size, at least the not the height. Height is not that of importance, but the width of the compost pile. You might require at least 2 meter diameter of compost pile, because the larger the compost pile, the more the bacteria will be placed, and the heat generated by the bacteria in the decomposition process will not escape that easily. So the compost pile will remain warm when the environment outside is quite cold. So that is essential for continuing continuing composting process during the winter season. So now I'll show you how to dismantle it and how to get the compost out from the system. As simple as the system is, it's very simple to extract the compost. Since we have not used any anchoring or anything like that, what we have to do is simply we have to pull this thing out. And since this is almost complete compost, so you can see the compost is not, you cannot visualize the compost ready from the top, but if you see from the sides, you will see that the compost at the bottom is very much ready. So this is the look of a finished compost at the bottom. You can see, don't worry about whether the compost is not looking ready at the top, because that's the just initial layer. Within that, inside it, there will be a lot of black material, finished compost material. So what we usually do is, I didn't speak about how we do this, how we operate this. Basically, every day we have got a different container where we collect the vegetable scraps that are generated from the garden, from our kitchen, and we collect them every day. And then in the morning, we place it in the compost pile along with the leaves and other garden waste that are generated. And once this is completely filled up to the brim over here, then we switch to the next pile over there, and this process continuously keeps going on and on. So this pile was also filled up till here, but in fact it was filled up twice till here, and it went down completely till here. So you can imagine how much compaction and how much decomposition has happened over the course of course of around 6 months. This we are doing after 6 months. So this is the, and you can also remove the twigs if you want, but do not produce any harm in the compost. And these twigs are quite, because the trees generate them it's quite difficult to separate it from the dried leaves because of the tree structure. So that does not generate any harm in the compost. But if you are very particular that the compost should be very fine, then what you can do is you can pass the compost through a mesh and only allow particular size of compost to be used in your garden. That is if you want to use it for a particular purpose. So I usually do that when I am using the compost for seedling. So for seedling, the compost has to be very fine so that it does not obstruct the young seeds, young sprouts that are coming out. So for in that particular scenario, that is quite useful. So now I'll remove this system, and then we'll look at how the finished compost looks like. Okay, so what we have to do is simply pull this up like this. Okay, it will be a bit difficult because the what happens is the tree, this is just adjacent to the tree, so the trees completely generates root system inside the composting pile. So that's why it just, you have to put a bit of more force. So anyway, yeah, so now I can hear the roots that are snapping out. Yeah, yeah, we go. So here is the finished compost. You can see the depth of the hole that I have created. and these are eggshells. They do not decompose as I mentioned before, but over the time it will just crush and just mix up with the soil. And here you can see there's one centipede. There will be several insects like that, so you don't have to worry about the insects. And there's quite a lot of soil over here, but if you can see, okay, it's quite solid. I'll have to dig it up, but basically this is how you do it. I'll try to remove it. Let's see if I'm successful. No, I have to dig it out. Anyway, so you got the idea, basic idea. This is some of the compost, ready compost that has come out. You can see how black it is and it's crumbly. This is how the finished compost looks like. And the smell that you get from this is like the smell that is generated in the when you get the first rains. That kind of beautiful smell you get from the compost pile. And as I mentioned, it will be filled with insects, but you don't have to worry about them. They will eventually die, and most of them will flee when you place it in your garden. Or if you are very particular about them, then you can dry the compost. That way they will definitely die. So I hope friends you love this video. If yes, smack that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and keep watching Plants My Love. We will be posting more such informative videos in the future, so make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel Plants My Love. Bye.